Defense on me!
I don't want them to gain another yard.
You blitz all night! And if they cross the line of scrimmage, I'm gonna take every last one of you out. You make sure they remember forever the night they played the Titans. Leave no doubt.
You gotta make yourself comfortable down there. Real comfortable.
Hello and welcome to another episode of ERG PowerTalk. I'm your host, Joe Santana. That was a clip from the movie Remember the Titans, released on September 29th, 2000. And in the movie, a newly integrated high school football team had to prove themselves because their success was doubted due to racial tensions and resistance from people around them to the change. They overcame this by uniting through discipline, hard work, and exceptional performance on the field. It was by winning games that they forced the community to recognize them and their value. And I believe that this captures where many ERGs find themselves today. Just a few short years ago, broad corporate commitments to DEI meant that ERGs could rely on goodwill and general support to give them value. Now, as some companies retreat under external pressure and others question what they are doing, ERGs must prove their value to the business, secure continued investment. An important key to doing this is by using analytics to link their initiatives to business impact and to show how they are affecting the business in a positive way. But how do you do that? You know, we talk about that a lot, but a lot of times the open question is, well, where do you get this information? How do you use it? And that's our topic for today. And to help us with this and other questions we have, we've got the perfect guest. But before we introduce our guest, let's take a moment to review our mission and acknowledge our supporters. This is ERG Power Talk, and I'm your host, Joe Santana. The purpose of ERG Power Talk is to provide a virtual forum for the exchange of great ideas and inspiration for ERG leaders as well as others interested in supporting ERGs. With ERG Power Talk, there is no more waiting until the next conference and praying that you get the budget to travel to the conference to find great ideas and stimulation toward action. Just subscribe and listen at your convenience. Before we begin, a quick note of thanks to our supporters: Atrium Health, Freighter Health and Wisconsin Medical College, Hiscox, Lee Health, National Audubon Society, Tapestry, Oshkosh Corporation, UL Solutions, and Sony Pictures Entertainment. Now, let's go straight to the program. He is a visionary leader in business analytics and decision intelligence who's shaped the field through pioneering work in financial businesses and human analytics. With decades of experience driving data-driven transformation at top financial institutions, he co-founded a boutique consultancy that helps businesses connect the dots between people, products, and profits. His expertise spans from building analytic functions that generate billions in revenue to advising organizations on leveraging data for strategic advantage. He's a sought-after speaker, educator, and thought leader. He challenges conventional thinking, advocating for critical engagement with data to drive smarter, more ethical decisions.
My name's Eric Sandosham. It's an Indian name, but here's the interesting part. I'm triracial, so when you talk about DI, ERGs, and all of that, I embody that. So I am the co-founder and partner to a boutique data analytics company called Red and White Consulting Partners, based out of Singapore.
Eric, thanks for joining us today on ERG Power Talk. I want to jump right into this with you. So, with all the things that ERG leaders can invest their time and energy in, and obviously these are things that they do in addition to regular day jobs that they have, how can they use data to identify the most impactful initiatives for their organizations? Because let's face it, there's a lot of stuff that you can do, but you want to pick the stuff that's the most significant, the most impactful. And I think data you would agree can help you do that. So how do you use data to identify those impactful initiatives?
Okay. If I could share maybe a screen of mine, let me see whether that comes up to you. Then we want to start a little bit with this. I just sort of put this chart together. I hope you can see it, right? So your question around data, actually, maybe let's take a step back to say, what is it that we measure? And therefore, do we have the data, and where do we source the data to serve that end of the measurement? And if we think about measurements, actually they have the spectrum to them. So for any kind of stuff that we do, right? So let's say if I'm running a marketing function, or I'm running a sales organization, or even in this case an ERG, right? I can measure the input end, the kind of resources that are coming in, and sort of thing, right? Like a supply chain. I can measure the activities that the organization generates. I can measure the output. I could measure the outcome. I could measure the impact, right? And I think the challenge today, as we see some of the external forces and pushback around DEI, is that many of the measurements traditionally have been around activities, outputs, and even outcomes. So for example, an output or an outcome could be, what is the ratio of women we are now hiring into an organization, or we're promoting number of, women on a board. And so you're looking at that gender mix, for example, right? Or even, certain minority or underprivileged groups. But the impact piece, I think, is missing, because the question that wants to be answered broadly by society and the organization is that if we have more women within the organization, or on the board, or at senior management levels, does the organization benefit from it, whether in terms of outperforming its peers, it has ability to penetrate into desirable new markets, and then you get goodwill from the community that it engages with, and those sort of things. That would be the kind of impact measurements and data that I think the ERG folks and the DI folks should be looking at. And that becomes a little bit more challenging, because that has a bit of a long tail action or outcome to them, because you can measure stuff that you immediately do, but then to try and trace that forward and say what is that repercussions, consequence, that the stuff that we do, how does that leave its mark deeper within the organization, deeper within the community we serve, for example.
I love this chart, and I'm going to describe it a little bit, because some of the people who will be listening, they won't be seeing, right?
Okay.
So in the chart, what you've got this line that starts with input on the left, moves to activity next, and then further out to the right to output, further out to the right to outcomes, and then finally in the fifth position ends up in impact. And what I hear you saying, and it makes a lot of sense, is that in a lot of organizations, DEI activities and ERG activities, the inputs are measured, the activity is measured, output to some degree is measured, and then outcomes, and it stops there. And it doesn't actually provide the impact measure. And I think to a great degree, the reason why that's the case is before we lived in an era where there was all this goodwill. And a lot of organizations just took it for granted. It's almost like if you've got more women, you're going to be more profitable. Or if you're a more diverse organization, you're going to be more effective and so forth. And if you took this action, you got this outcome, you don't need to measure impact, because we know that the impact is there. But that's not the case anymore. Now we're in an era where people around us and businesses are saying, let's see the impact. Where is that impact? Or they're questioning whether the impact does result from those outcomes. So the need to provide proof on that fifth category of impact is now imperative, which maybe in the past it wasn't as imperative. It was just taken for granted to some degree. Well, McKinsey says that, if the companies that have more women are 29% more profitable, there you go. That's our business case. That's not the case anymore. Organizations want to see what's happening here at XYZ Corporation. How is this impacting us? And how do we measure that? So, Eric, where can ERG leaders and others get the kind of data that they need to measure impact?
Yeah. So I would say instead of jumping right into the measurement and say, well, if you give me this data, I can construct all this measurement. I think it starts with asking good questions on impact. So, for example, you may want to say, how does, allowing for sabbaticals, let's say, we have this, right? When women go on pregnancy leave, or even men today do that, or even, in some organizations, they can take time out 3 months to, rest and find themselves again. How does allowing for sabbatical and maybe the right to return back to your same job or even a similar job reduce the cost of replacement? And that's kind of not just cost of replacement, there's also productivity loss, because you can bring in somebody or an internal transfer that could also, have ramifications in terms of people trying to make up for the immediate loss in productivity. Or you could ask questions like, if you have more diversity and inclusion, let's say in a particular function, are you able to retain more valuable talent? And when we talk about the valuable talent, it may not be about the talent that's diverse. It may be the majority people also want to work in a diverse environment, and they enjoy that the back and forth and innovation and all of it. And so if you look at it broadly, you say it's not just about retaining the group that the underprivileged or the minority group that we are retaining, but we may be retaining actually the broader organization talent, because the diversity has this spillover effect. And I think it's important to start with these sorts of questions and hypotheses. Some of them you have research, and again, even if you had research and say, well, McKinsey says having more women leads to better revenues, the question would be, how much more? Right? Are we at a similar benchmark to the market, to our peers, or are we trailing behind? And what is the lever that we can pull? What would be that ideal ratio that allows us to get ahead of the competitor, right? So and I think phrasing those kind of questions allow us then to go source for data, not just the outcome or the impact measurement, but also the levers and drivers that allows you then to go back and fine tune and shape it and say, and so that's the input activity end. Should we be doing more of something, or should we be doing less of something because actually it may have a negative impact, for example?
Yeah, you started with a quote from McKinsey, right? A lot of people go there, McKinsey or one of these think tanks, but what you did with it was a little different. A lot of people say, McKinsey says companies that have more women at the board level are more productive in terms of revenue and so forth, et cetera. And they stop there. That's it, right? There's the quote. That's my proof. That's it. You took it to another level where you said, well, if that's the case in general, how is that showing up in the specific here? And how can I then show specifically how? And the reason why that grabbed my attention was because a while back I was talking about how a lot of these think tanks say women tend to leave organizations faster than men. So they have higher turnover than men. Or people who belong to underrepresented or minority groups tend to leave organizations faster. And okay, you can quote that and you can say, okay, what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase the retention and stop there. But another way to look at that is, so what's the cost to this company? Right? Our company, whatever company you're in. If you have women that are leaving faster, let's say, than men, and so women stay maybe 5 or 6 years, whereas men stay 10 years, then there has to be a cost associated with getting someone in to then replace that person, training them, whatever that number is. And in a big company, that number could be millions of dollars. You find out that the reason why, let's say, for example, that's the case is because their company doesn't have a really good program for when women go on maternity leave, or a good reentry program when they come back. And the cost of that reentry program and that exit program is, let's say, $250,000. And your cost of having that gap in turnover is like $20 million. There's your business case. And there's your impact that you can show as a result.
You can go back to that same sort of 5-stage diagram, right? So you have to collect data across that spectrum from input, activity, output, outcome. So you can connect the dots and say, if I'm not getting, or even if I'm getting the outcome, how do I get even more of it?
Yes, makes perfect sense. So there's another thing that you talk about that I think is important to this conversation, which is predictive analytics. So for those who are listening or watching this who are not familiar with the terms, could you tell us a little bit about what predictive analytics are
Analytics.
and then
Yeah.
how
Okay.
ERGs can leverage them to anticipate challenges and
Okay.
opportunities before they
In
show
fact, in
up?
fact, I made a chart also. So again, apologies to the listeners who can't see the diagram, but again, it's a little bit
No,
more confused. So again, you can read it from left to right. Think of it as a line where it flows from and the arrow flows from left to right. We typically this is how we sort of articulate what is data-driven problem solving, for which predictive analytics, sits within that domain. And if you think about the space of data-driven problem solving, it typically starts with a business problem. So we have that on the left, and then that business problem needs to sort of be translated into a data problem. So, for example, you say, I have a problem hiring more women, or in with STEM and technical backgrounds and all of that. Then I need to represent this in data points. What do you mean by, having technical education? Are you looking for specific degrees and so on and so forth, right? Or academic discipline. So it needs to be put into very clear data description, right? And so the business problem gets translated into a data problem. The data, then you work on that data problem to generate some insights, right? To say what's driving it, where are the correlations, what's the pattern, and so on and so forth. And once you've sort of then understood the nature of the business problem, which has been translated into a data problem, you then say, okay, now how do we go about solving it? Right. So I can say, yeah, the problem is I'm not able to hire enough women with technical backgrounds because actually we don't have enough women going into these academic disciplines at the top of the funnel. And so, we may have to source them externally or from a different market and all that, but it's not that they're not attracted to our organization. It's just that the market internally doesn't have enough of it, right? And so understanding that nature of the business problem then gives us a way to think about how will we solve it. Now, you can solve solutions are not single. They could be many different ways to skin the cat, as they say. And so you could say, let's source for foreign talent, or we could then invest in the upstream, create these programs. So you can take people who are not so technical, and then we could onboard them and make them, and prepare and train them to be a bit more technical. So there are multiple ways to address it. And that's the data solution part. And that data solution eventually then needs to be at the end of this diagram gets translated into a business solution. Because you started with a business problem, you need to end with a business solution. So having a data solution, so predictive analytics is a data solution. I'm predicting which employee is at risk, which employee I should be promoting, which employee is more valuable, and those sort of thing. But knowing that versus saying I have to integrate this now into my HR process. How does that information get to the line? How does that information get benchmarked to the rest of the other employees, and how will it be used, right? Whether it's in promotion or not, that would be the business solutioning end. Okay, so typically that's how we think about using data to solve problems. Now, in the same diagram, I've also then split. There are two phases. So when you're translating a business problem into a data problem and then figuring out some insights to the nature of the problem, that's what we call a problem articulation phase. Once I've understood the nature of the problem, I then start to design solutions for it, which is the solution articulation phase. And then I have to integrate it ultimately back into how the business operates and all of that. The predictive analytics, strictly speaking, is a solution articulation, sits within that solution articulation space. That means you already have an understanding of the kinds of problems you're trying to solve for. And typically these problems have what we call uncertainties. For example, I have 1,000 employees. I would like to promote the best of them, let's say, right? I can eyeball it. I can use my performance ratings and all that, but I also realize there is some bias that creeps in. And again, human raters are not perfect. And so there is always a little bit of noise and uncertainty whether the ratings correspond to a truly talented, valuable employee, right? So I may say, okay, I would like to get it sharper because even with with the performance rating, there is still some error, some noise. Can I now use other kinds of information? Look at, their activities during work, look at their participation in employee events and so on. So I cast the net wider, and I can build a predictive model to say, well, this employee is more likely to be more valuable than another one, even though on a ranking of the performance scores, they may look similar enough, right? So the predictive analytics, therefore, is used to sharpen or reduce the level of uncertainty in a forward event or a future event for us to take decision on. But it requires that you are already clear what you're solving for. So it shouldn't be a case. Let's use predictive analytics to see where the threat is coming from or where the market opportunities lie, because you've not cast a problem statement. And so it's just data monitoring in that sense, right? Yeah. So I just wanted to at least get that part, ironed out. In fact, within the DI ERG space, I would argue that you need less predictive analytics, but more diagnostic analytics. The diagnostic typically is the one that says, if I have a problem statement, find me what are the levers and drivers that shape that problem and get me to understand it. Why is it that certain, practices or initiatives in the ERGDI space do better than others, right? And then assuming you can measure that impact, why am I not getting that impact that I thought I should be getting? Or why am I trailing behind my competitor? And doing that diagnostic work allows me then to now play with those levers in different ways to make better decisions, as opposed to saying, let's build a predictive model to try and get us there, right? So predictive models typically serve a very, very unique purpose. In this case, if you want to predict who's valuable, who should I promote, or who is at risk, those sort of things. You could also predict how the market may react to certain DI or ERG initiatives. Yeah. So if you have broader data than that, you can say, well, if we were to go to market with this initiative, will the community that we serve resonate with it? Right. And this will be classic like marketing research, right? Coke, the new Coke, and you want to try and change the taste and all of that. You will then do these market surveys and research to be able to then build some prediction as to a possible outcome to your actions.
By the way, Eric, excellent job making this very visual for people who are only listening. I don't need to add anything to that. I think you did a great job of making it very visual. I can see how this type of model is probably extremely useful to people who are leaders in the DEI space, because they're looking at things like what you said. If I do this, what impact will it have in my particular market, or what impact will it have on the business's particular clients or workforce, et cetera, et cetera. At the ERG level, I think some of the areas where I might see something like this being useful is ERGs that are looking at how to prepare the people who are members of their community to be more effective in jobs that are opening up as a result of AI, and how jobs even that existed today are changing as a result of that. What can we do with our groups, our members, in order to make them prepared to take on more of those responsibilities as the workforce, as the work activity morphs and changes due to artificial intelligence, robotics, or other technologies that are coming in. So it becomes a means of preparing their members to be valuable contributors to the organization, which is good for the organization and good for their career as the organization continues to evolve as a result of all these internal and external forces. So I think that it has a lot of value in that area. So if you were to skinny down metrics you think that ERG community leaders should be tracking to demonstrate impact, what would those metrics be?
Okay, so I want to try and not to say the specific metric itself, but maybe as a category, right? And in the world of data analytics, data science that I operate in, we've sort of skinnied it down also to just, businesses really care about 5 things. If I was looking at, say, finance, if I was in finance and trying to, put forward a data analytics agenda, or if I was in operations or marketing and so forth, they really come down to these sort of 5 major categories at the end. businesses are either interested to increase revenue, decrease cost, improve efficiency. And when we say improve efficiency, it's actually really about deferring costs in some sense or disconnecting the revenue expense ratio, right? So you get more for less, right? And then they are also interested in risk, reducing risk. And this could be operational, credit risk, reputational risk, those sort of things. And finally, user experience. And again, the user can be an employee, could be the customer, could be the community, depending on the nature of who you serve. So these 5 broad categories are typically the kind of data that we want to then collect towards. And if you take any one of those categories, you can go very deep into a lot of metrics and a lot of granular data. And again, looking at those initiatives, which one it serves. If I use that same lens and now apply it within, let's say, the DI ERG space, I would argue actually within that space, there may be sort of 3 broad categories. Definitely growing revenue will always be there. And there is evidence to that. I mean, for example, we know, a lot of research supports the linkage between diversity and innovation. And then innovation, of course, has this outcome of in revenues and all that you can measure. They definitely want to reduce cost, right? And again, we can see if you're being inclusive of certain groups within the organization, women going on maternity, people taking sabbatical, obviously you can reduce costs there. Then there is also what I would call sort of public sentiment, and that maybe sits in a user experience space, but the stuff that you do definitely has goodwill, or I hate to use the term PR because it sounds so phony, but it's a perception to the market, right? And people want to work with businesses that they perceive as having good integrity, doing good, meaning well, and all of that. Of course, we know organizations are not charity, but it doesn't mean that you go out there and gouge and price gouge and fleece your customers, right? So if there's a conscience behind that organization, customers generally gravitate to such organizations. So there's that PR value or that community perception value, and all this can be measured. So even there, you can be doing surveys, for example, right? In the communities that you are in and engaging with, how do they perceive you? Right. And in fact, they should do that. If you've got a broad enough DI ERG initiative, you should actually be doing external polling as not just internally measuring yourself, because there is this outward amplification of the stuff that you do out into the world. Right.
Okay, here is what I got out of the first half of our discussion with Eric. 1. Many ERG leaders have historically measured ERG success by tracking activities and outputs, but now leadership demands proof of impact. You must demonstrate how your initiatives contribute to business performance in an impactful way. 2. To do that, you must leverage analytics to connect your efforts to measurable business benefits. There are 2 types of analytics that can be quite useful to ERG leaders. Diagnostic analytics identify the causes of current conditions so that you can understand and improve them, while predictive analytics forecast future outcomes to help you take proactive steps toward a better result. 3. Effective application of diagnostics or predictive analytics to create business impact starts with refocusing your objectives and what you measure. So instead of just tracking your activity, like we ran a Heritage Month celebration, or participation rates like 100 people attended our events, seek to analyze and measure how your efforts reduce costs, increase revenue, improve team performance, broaden market share, and or enhance company brand and reputation. 4. Before leveraging diagnostic analytics towards creating real business impact, it's crucial to clearly translate your company's business problems or opportunities into specific and measurable data points. For example, turnover is high in our community, which costs the company more money, and we need to reduce it, is not specific enough. You must drill down with questions like, How much is this higher than average turnover costing? Why are people in our community leaving faster than other team members? What is the cost of potential solutions? And finally, 5, likewise, when using predictive analytics to determine trends and future outcomes and propose ways of getting a better result, you need to start with, again, measurable data points. In some organizations, ERGs can't get their hands on the closely guarded internal information collected by, say, HR, but ERGs can use publicly available data from platforms like Glassdoor, LinkedIn, and any company reports that are made available to them to put together information and analyze patterns affecting their community in areas like turnover, promotions, etc. By combining this source data with surveys of their communities and the finance department's estimates of the future costs of factors like turnover and the lack of a more robust future leadership bench, ERGs can build a fairly good predictive model identifying the drivers of these future costs and then propose targeted community initiatives to produce a better result. In the next segment of our discussion with Eric, we will explore how ERG leaders can effectively present their data-driven insights and craft compelling narratives using the right visual tools and ensure their findings drive actionable decisions that secure leadership buy-in and long-term investment. All this and more when we come back, but first this. I'll see you on the other side. Are you an ERG group or committee chair struggling to balance your ERG activities with your day job responsibilities? Well, you're not alone. There are hundreds of thousands of passionate ERG leads all around the world that find themselves in the same boat. The only solution found by many is to give up lunch hours and personal time with family and friends. But there is a better way, and that better way is to master the powerful skills that enable you to 1. Set realistic and achievable compelling goals and priorities. 2. Distribute the workload by effectively delegating tasks and responsibilities to others. 3. Communicate in a way that increases your impact with less time and effort on your part. 4. Secure the full and active support of executive sponsors and other senior business leaders. And 5. Fit your ERG leadership work into a reasonable set of time boundaries. And that and more is exactly what tens of thousands of your colleagues have learned to do effortlessly by participating in Supercharge Workshops. Supercharge Workshops was developed by us along the same easy and powerful how-to framework found in our popular Supercharge Your ERGs book. The modular, customizable programs are loaded with fun exercises and tools that will immediately give you back hours of time each day while increasing your ability to achieve high impact and measurable results in both your ERG work and your job. For more details on how you can schedule a Supercharge Workshop session in your organization, go to superchargeworkshops.com. That's https:// Supercharge Workshops, one word with no spaces.com. So don't suffer silently. Take that first step towards stopping your struggle today. Check out Supercharge Workshops. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is how can ERG leaders translate all this complex data into narratives? Because I know you talk a lot about how to influence senior leadership, you got to go from the numbers to some kind of narrative. And in my own experience, I've always found that narrative without numbers is weak, but numbers without narrative is not moving.
Right? That's true. That's true. They go hand in glove. To be honest, they go hand in glove together. Do. Great that you asked this. I think that this sits squarely in the common term that people use would be data storytelling. But yeah, I agree with you. It's much more about presenting the right kind of narrative. And in fact, I teach a course in data storytelling at a local university here in Singapore for the last 6-7 years. And we use tools like Tableau and so on. But what we discover is that it's not about the tool. Interestingly enough, across the world, And through the regular, high school education process and all that, we are never exposed to a very simple, sort of a very simple truth that there is such thing as the right chart for the right data or the right point that you want to make, and there is such a thing as the wrong chart to be used, right? Given the set of data. We tend to discover this sort of by trial and error when we work in the organization, and then we've got to do some presentation, and I think we've all been there. And the boss may say, why don't you give your data to, your fellow colleague, because he is really good at making charts. And it's true, right? Your colleague takes your data, and then he comes back and the charts are wonderful and everybody loves him. And then you're saying, but I did all the work, I hate my colleague so much because I'm the one that found the insights, did all the work, but he made the charts, right? And there's some people who have that actual intuition of making the right connection with how to present it. Okay, and so exactly in this adult course that I teach at the university, we actually go through that. There's a science to this, and in fact, if you Google and there's stuff out there on the internet, there's a term called visual vocabulary, right? That in fact was first started by the Financial Times, and they brought in in fact a diverse team to try to create a taxonomy on how charts should be developed and how it's not and developed because of from a recipient perspective. We are visual creatures, human beings, right? And we see information in generally the same ways. I mean, and we can all be tricked. You've seen this on the internet. The lines are the same length, but they appear different, or they appear not parallel or slanted. But actually, if you take a ruler and you measure them, they're exactly the same, and you cannot figure out how is it that I don't see that, right? And we all share this because we are made the same way, and so. We go through this process and say, how do we then use the right visual vocabulary to present the points that you want to make? So the points, for example, am I trying to compare better or worse? And then, so there's a visual vocabulary called deviation charts. And there are ways to develop deviation chart that makes explicit where that target or that benchmark is, so your eye can see whether you're better or worse against it. Or you say, no, actually, I just want to see how things are distributed, right? And again, then you have, the typical histogram or the normal distribution curve and those sort of things. And your eye will then want to see, is it symmetrical or is it skewed, right? And so those charts, in fact, triggers the way our minds process. And one of the things that came out of it is that pie charts typically are horrible. In fact, we all use it a lot. We see that in many presentations, but the mind actually has difficulty trying to read the right kind of information signals in pie charts. Yeah. So today, again, with tools like Tableau, Power BI, and all, they're extremely interactive, and they can build stuff that we couldn't do before, even with Excel. And this is stuff, in fact, so you can go online, look up this thing called visual vocabulary, visual cues, and you can actually make some very nice charts to that. Now, so that's just charting. But to get your narrative right, typically with data storytelling, and this is again, kudos to McKinsey, right? They have this methodology that says start with the end in mind. So you start with the executive summary, and then you sort of build up the supporting evidence to explain how you got to the conclusion. Because many people, when they do data storytelling, they tend to start from left to right, meaning I show you where I got the data. I show you what I did with the data. I cleaned it, and then I made it good. And then, by the time you've lost the audience already, they're tired. So instead, you should just tell them, look, this is what I found. And then, let me show you, if you're interested, right? If I got you at hello and you're still interested in this what I found, this insight is valuable, let me now show you how I got there so that you can believe that it is justified, right? So again, typically with data story, you invert it, show them the punchline right on the first page. Yeah.
I love that. I think any kind of format that you use has to be a format that the mind can easily follow. To your point, if you look at two lines, even if they're exactly the same, depending on their positioned, your brain tells you that one line is bigger than the other.
I can make a line green and one red, and you think the green line is better, yeah.
The green line's back. Yeah. And you can say, well, that's not logical. The data's right there, but that's not the way the human brain works. So we have to present the data in a way that's impactful. And the story has to follow some kind of comfortable narrative.
So one of the points I think the narrative also is typically with a lot of management meeting when we go through this process and show the data, the so what is somewhat lost. And I think that so what has to be built into the narrative. So when we're showing the let's say the impact, we need to be able to connect it with these levers and drivers. This is what we did and this is what we got. And did we get exactly what we thought we would get? Was it per expectation? Can we get
Mhm.
more? So even if we did, someone will ask the question, so what do you want me to do? Do we invest more? Do we invest less? Do we change certain directions? That part, I think, tends to sometimes get missed out in the narrative, and we all applaud, wow, wonderful charts and all that. And then when we leave the meeting, so what do we do next? What decisions were taken? Right? Yeah. So I like to try and get back to that so what, right? So even if we show the insights, at the end, it needs to be connected with what decisions are we going to improve upon or augment.
So what do we want that audience that we just presented this presentation to do with that information? Now that we've made a
Yeah.
case, it's like making a sale. You present the product, you explain all the features, but in the end, you have to ask for the sale. You can't just stop
Yes, yes.
and figure, everybody else
Yeah.
will figure it out on their own. Excellent. Benchmarking. Let's go to that real quick because you started touching on that. Talk a little bit about what role benchmarking can play in demonstrating ERG performance and how ERGs can use that.
Okay. So I would say benchmark, there are sort of two kinds of benchmark we can think about. So there is what I would say internal benchmarks. So you can do intra-department, intra-function, maybe country to country comparisons if you're a large multi-corporation. Or you will also then have external benchmarks. I think external benchmarks are a little bit dicey and a little bit noisy because you have to find someone who is your nearest lookalike competitor or similar industry. And again, no two companies operate in exactly the same way. If they did, then they wouldn't be competing, right? And so
Yep.
these differences will add some noise for external benchmarking. But internal benchmarking can be great ways to, I mean, if you're a large organization, even if you have, DI, ERG initiatives supported from the top, they don't get sort of distributed out and dissipated across the organization evenly, right? So there will be resistance in some pockets. Some people may have had different opinions and all that. So having those internal benchmarks can help people say, look, if I'm now asked to be more innovative, maybe operations wasn't particularly thought of as innovative before, but now we've got new tools with generative AI and all that. Maybe can reinvent the game. And if we have to be innovative, we can leverage some of this diversity sort of benchmark that other departments have done in the past that we can now use and say, okay, if we were to now go down this path, right? And there is like this obvious correlation. If you are monoculture, then sort of innovation tends to get a little bit limited, right? And it's just about people having shared different experiences they bring to the table. And so I could say, well, I need to now embrace more diversity in operations to be able to generate more innovative outcomes. How should I now measure myself? Oh, then there is a benchmark with the marketing team, with a sales team, with another team, a digital team, and they seem to be able to generate this level of innovative outcomes. And so maybe I should do something similar as a way to do that. But I think internal benchmark helps to raise the game for everyone as well. It becomes a knowledge inventory where to say that if I haven't done this before and I'm now wanting to, because again, we want to hit an organization outcome. If I'm being tasked to deliver more revenue, save more expense, generate more goodwill with the community I engage with, then I can use that difference across different departments, what they've done, as a way to uplift my own actions. And the external benchmark, I think one, of course, if there are organizations vendors out there that sort of are already doing some polling and surveying that they can then bring on board, you can subscribe to. That would be great, right? But I think
Mhm.
this will be challenging in many countries. I think the US probably has the probably the most matured surveying, polling industry that can sort of capture a lot of external information. But for those countries that don't, they may need to then engage someone to specifically do a little bit of that on their own. Or you could do surveys, even you yourself can trigger those surveys to the community or to your customer base and ask them how do they perceive in some of the DEI ERG initiatives that we're doing. Of course, you may not want to word it in exactly the same way, but you could ask
Yeah.
them, do you think we are more innovative now? Do you think we are more, we give back to the communities that we serve and all of that? That can be a very nice way to sort of then benchmark and measure over time.
Excellent. Great ideas. So I was going to go next to the discussion of how these groups can use data to secure continued investment. But I think that it becomes clear that when you're able to show that your goal is to have a particular impact, that impact's probably going to have a monetary value attached to it. That's a much stronger argument than when you say we're going to do all this activity. So I think once you start talking about impact, you automatically are a notch above someone who is asking for investment on the basis of just some kind of outcome.
I think the leaders in the organization, if we go down that path, they will be chasing you to invest in your initiatives because they want to drive up those outcomes. If I take, say, even my own experience within analytics. So I mean, analytics nowadays, they say on data science, sexiest job in the 21st century, but it wasn't sexy when I started. In the 90s, there was no such thing as data science. It was dirty work. No one wanted to go. There was, this is like the early days of data warehouse. Hard to get data together, put it together, clean it, and it's just toil. It's digital toil. And I had a very challenging time trying to raise the profile of analytics, even within. I worked in Citibank for almost 20 years, and to get people to appreciate that analytics was not a support function, but a business driving function, right? And that work was very much like this to show them those outcomes and impact, and say actually the work I do actually generates this revenue. When I clean up my data and I give you this insight and you made a better decision out of it, it generated this incremental for you, right? And over time, as people appreciated that, then they came to me and said, look, Eric, we want to get more of these impact and this, revenue and cost stuff. Why don't we give you more people? If you had 10 and you could generate so much, why don't we give you 100, right? And that changed the entire narrative. Then I wasn't always trying to prove my worth, but now much more to say, okay, now you've invested in me. I delivered before. Now I want to keep optimizing and pushing new boundaries.
You just anticipated my next question, which is, what are some of the top lessons from business intelligence and analytics that ERGs can use? And one of them is that once you start delivering impact, then the business starts chasing you because they want more impact. They want more of that, as opposed to you chasing the business saying, look, I can be valuable to you. Once you prove that value, then suddenly the doors open up for more investment and more attention. So I think that's a valuable lesson for ERGs and DEI leaders that comes out of the data analytics practice.
Yeah. So beyond this sort of, owning those impact and outcomes, and therefore having the business leaders chase you for additional deliveries. I think if I think about the key things that business analytics, business intelligence folks typically think about and be successful, it sort of comes out to maybe three sort of big operating principles. So one is that you need to organize your data. And here maybe the question I would want to pose to the listeners and then the viewers of your program. So even within the DI ERG space, I get the sense, even reading certain articles, that a lot of these measurements, whether they are outcomes or impact based, tend to be very ad hoc and on demand. As opposed to say, no, we are actively, systematically putting this data together every day, every month, every year. And when we need to slice and dice it, it's a place where we can go to that's already, the data is already organized, like whether it's in a data warehouse or, in a data mart and all of that. And so built with that intent to be used to measure and slice and dice for all these sort of like DI, ERG activities. So that would be one. Organize the data. I mean, so if you're in marketing, marketing is its own set of organized data. Sales does the same. Operations does the same. So why not DI? Why not the ERG? Two, the
Yeah.
other point I think I alluded to earlier was the insights must connect with decisions. It's the so what question. So any kind of work that you're doing, with your increasing certain ratios of underrepresented groups, or being more inclusive, or changing the way people work in the culture, all of these are useful insights, but ultimately, what decisions need to be taken or what decisions need to change as a result of this insight. So that so what question is critical, again, to moving the needle for most business analysts. And the last one is this whole idea of test and learn. So coming back even to, let's say, a lot of past research, whether in academia or McKinsey saying, less more women on the board leads to more profits for the organization. Let's say that, they make that statement. It may be true 10 years, 20 years ago. It doesn't mean it's true today. Or it may be dissipating. We don't know. It may be on the decline for various reasons, right? But again, with different generational shifts and different business dynamic changes, some of these past research may no longer be valid. And so we shouldn't just take it
Mhm.
lock, stock, and barrel because some professor had done it in the past, 20, 50 years ago. It's going to be valid today. We live in slightly different times. And so this idea of test and learn becomes important. You have to keep asking the question, is it still valid? And maybe there are other kinds of
Mhm.
impact we didn't think of, right? Because everything is so interconnected today. And then to be able to formulate new questions, new hypotheses, and say, okay, maybe we're not sure, let's run a small, pilot and let's see. And then we
Mhm.
collect data on that and we say, okay, it seems to make sense. Let's now build this out as a much more sustainable initiative. Then we can bring that back. Then we will collect systematic data on it to try to then, operationalize this. So that whole cycle of test and learn, I think, is essential in the data analytics community.
That's excellent advice. So, my last two questions for you, Eric, are one, what resources do you recommend our listeners who want to learn more about this topic pursue? And two, how can our listeners reach you?
Okay. I think in terms of topic that there's just too much because the space of data and then I would start with trying to understand broadly this whole space of data analytics first, or business analytics, as opposed to say how does data can be, how data can be used in an optimal way for, say, DEI. I don't think there's a lot of books or even articles that specifically deals with data at the intersection of very specific types of initiatives, right? But the principle and the foundational ideas around data analytics is common to all. So if, for example, I started my role in analytics in marketing, right? Today I could I consult for the HR community. I do a lot of HR people analytics work as a non-HR person, and I challenge the status quo with them. Similar like yourself, you didn't come from a DI background, but because of that business perspective, we're able to bring that same practice of data analytics. Now I bring it into the HR organization. I challenge them and say, look, why don't you think about the measurements in a particular way, right? So for DIERG leaders, I think they should start with getting some of the ground basics around data analytics. There are many, many good books. It doesn't have to be technical, so you don't have to say, look, I need to learn programming and stuff like that. I don't think people enjoy that. And if you're in this space, I assume you can get your hands on some support resources who can run and crunch the numbers for you. But having an appreciation of um, how data is collected, right? That data sometimes can be noisy, can be biased, and you need to sort of be aware about that. As a leader, to be aware of that helps you to shape that conversation with the people who are eventually going to crunch and run the analysis for you on that data. So there are many good books out there. In fact, just like Introduction to Business Analysis and all that. Many of these books are non-technical. I think would be a great way to start. And definitely there are great books also on how to do data storytelling. right? So these will be the two pieces, because eventually the guy crunching the data typically are not great at data storytelling because they don't have the context to bring it home, right? And so you will have to also shape that data narrative. So I think having these two sort of skills or fluency becomes important to drive your agenda. You can look me up on LinkedIn. If you post my name out there, Eric Sandosham. There's only one in LinkedIn, so it can't be mistaken. But you can also look up the company that I co-founded called Red and White Consulting Partners, based out of Singapore. We have a website, but LinkedIn is honestly the best place to locate anyone today.
Excellent. Well, Eric, thank you again for being on ERG Power Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, here's what I got out of the second half of our discussion with Eric. 1, when presenting data, lead with the key insight or conclusion rather than walking through the process of how the data was gathered and analyzed, etc., etc. Hook your audience immediately with the promise of a desirable result, then provide supporting evidence. 2, using the correct charts is crucial for effective storytelling. Avoid common mistakes like using pie charts, which are really hard for the brain to interpret. Instead, leverage visual vocabulary to ensure clarity and impact. 3, data storytelling must drive action by answering a simple question at the end. So what? Ensure that your presentations explicitly connect insights to decisions. Don't just show trends. Explain clearly what needs to happen next and what actions leadership should take. 4, leaders invest in initiatives that demonstrate clear business impact. So frame your efforts in terms of measurable outcomes rather than just listing activities. When organizations see tangible value, they're going to proactively seek to invest more in you. 5, just as marketing and sales teams have structured data that they store, ERG should have systemically collected and organized data. Having readily available metrics enables more effective storytelling, performance tracking, and investment justification. So work with your DEI team to have them help you collect and store this data for you and all the other ERGs in your organization. And finally, 6, get off the historical best or next practice wagon. Business environments are all different and they change frequently. Past research done by think tanks and in other companies may not always hold true for you. You should continuously do your own research, test, measure, and refine your strategies based on your current data rather than relying solely on the historical findings of others. I remember a time when an ERG leader who was frustrated that leadership wasn't seeing the value of their group asked me for help in increasing leadership's appreciation of their work. He told me how he hosted events, had driven membership engagement, and had one of the highest event attendances in the company. But every time budget discussions came up, they were still treated as a nice to have, and he had to fight and scratch for every penny. So I asked him a simple question. What business problem have you solved? And thinking about that question changed everything for him. Instead of focusing on participation numbers, he dug deep into how his ERG contributed to reducing turnover expense among members of his community and helping key departments like sales better understand the needs of the company's customers. When they presented these contributions to improving business impact to leadership, they started with the punchline, using the right visuals and answering the so what question. Suddenly, his ERG went from being a nice to have to being a vital to have. That ERG wasn't seen anymore as just another internal program. It was a strategic business asset. So here's my challenge to you. Take a hard look at your ERG measures for success. Are you tracking activities or are you proving impact? Start asking the right questions, organizing your data, and presenting it in a way that drives action. Because when you stop just reporting what you do and you start showing how you drive business success, leadership won't just fund your ERG, they'll champion it. Thank you for tuning in to ERG Power Talk. If you enjoyed and got value out of this program, please like us and leave a favorable review at your podcast provider's site. Also, invite others to listen to the show. By the way, contact me if you're looking for an ERG Symposium keynote or a leader for your strategy workshop, new chair onboarding, and or ERG bootcamp. I can run these for you either in person or in a virtual setting. Also, for more great ideas and tips for your ERGs, get my books, Supercharge Your ERGs, 18 Tips to Power Up Your ERG/BRG Strategy, and the new DEI and ERG Frontier, how you and your efforts can rise and thrive in the new world of constant disruption. Both available on Amazon.com. I'm Joe Santana. Thanks again for tuning in.